let's talk about runes, okay? So after playing the game for 3 to 4 years, sometimes inactively, I think I have a good understanding about runes in League of Legends. Runes matter, and here's going to be my take why. I'm by no means an expert on this topic, but I think after, like I said, for 3 to 4 years of experience, I think I've come to understand rune pages very well, using my prerequisite knowledge about numbers in video games. So I made a little thing here so we can get along more easily. Let's look at these in order. So I need you to understand why percentage matters. Here's an easy example for why. If you look at precision, precision has a lot of runes that work off percentages. For example, coup de grace, cut down, and last stand. These runes generally taken on AD champions like bruisers or ADCs are going to be making a difference because sometimes you want more damage against enemies who are low HP before you will be low HP. Sometimes you want more damage against enemies that are more tanky than you, and sometimes you want it to survive longer and therefore deal more damage later on. Depending on your champion, the matchup you're in, and the items you're building, these runes will have significantly different impacts on the game. And if you think about these in terms of percentages, then you need to understand that there's a difference between 5 to 15% in terms of output. It's not about chance, it's not about randomness, it's just about numbers. So in the end, let's compare how much damage you will deal if you were an ADC champion who has generally less HP than everyone else in the game, right? Because none of your items scale off HP. Meanwhile, everyone else in the game is going to have HP in their item components or runes, and apart from level scaling, right? So in the end, you're going to be less max HP than everyone else in the game. So cut down becomes that much more useful against everyone else. So let's, for example, imagine you're an ADC who deals 200 pre-mitigated damage. That means no armor involved in this calculation. And your enemy is going to have so much more max HP than you, then you're hitting this 15% benchmark from cutdown. So I made a little calculation here you can use at home if you have a calculator or Windows 10. So let's put this into the calculator and see the result. There you go, 30 damage plus. So you're going to do 230 damage instead of 200, just because of cut down. Now 30 damage might not seem like a lot, but remember that 200 damage is also not the full damage you're going to deal on an ADC champion in late game. Depending on the champion and the items you're building, ADCs do more like 1000 to 1200 damage in late game. Again, depending on your matchup, items, and champion. But this is like an average that I'm going to assume here. If you can keep in mind percentages in this way, then it's going to be intuitively way easier for you to understand runes and why to take which rune and what situation. Let's talk about champion identity for a second. So, since there's different roles in League of Legends, there's going to be different champion identities depending on what role and champion you're playing. So when you're deciding which rune page to take as like a prerequisite, you need to think about your champion's identity. And in this case, let's take another random example and think about tanks. So for a tank like Sion, there's not really that many options. Sure, there's some niche situations like certain players in solo queue like Babos that will take Phase Rush for a very unique build, but in almost all other cases, what a tank generally wants is more tankiness, and what other rune page to take than Resolve, which is centered around tank items. So when you're going to be a tank, you need to think about how you're going to play lane and what to do after. For a tank like Sion, in most matchups, it's going to be possible for you to auto-attack or trade with the enemy top laner, in which case what rune page should you be taking? Let's think about Grasp for a second. Grasp gives you more later on stats in the game if you're going to be able to trade early game, which means that Sion can utilize this rune very well since he needs that max HP anyway. On the other hand, Aftershock is more like a defensive rune that doesn't give you that many stats later on, except when you're building a lot of resistances, but it's generally not used on top laners as much. It's more like a supportive role, like Thresh or Braum can use this really well, since it is only a certain moment and generally top laners can play around it, right? Guardian is also more about support players and being able to guard your ally, which in top lane doesn't really matter since there's no one else around, right? So for Sion top lane, generally Grasp would be a good option. Now, if you want to think about other runes, there's some differences you want to make in terms of what are you going to do in this game. Sion has a shield, therefore Shield Bash has some value, for sure. In teamfights, Font of Life could be more useful because you're going to have a lot of HP and you can heal your champion teammates. Now you need to think about other things, like is the enemy going to build a lot of Grievous runes to negate your healing? Maybe they do, maybe they won't. You need to think about that as well as like, do your teammates benefit from healing in a team fight? If they're all going assassin or like low HP, high damage output champions, then probably not as much. On the other hand, Demolish is very useful since you can take towers more easily, and Sion is generally a champion that benefits a lot from that kind of playstyle. Then again, is your matchup a matchup in which you are able to use Demolish, or are you going to be pushed under tower 24/7? If that's the case, maybe don't take Demolish. You have to think about these concepts when choosing a rune. I'm going to talk a little about which runes are generally better than others in comparison. So for example, there's a lot of debate on certain runes. As for ADC, my opinion is that Cutdown is more useful in most cases than Coup de Grace, simply because the percentage numbers are so much higher and almost every team is going to have at least one tank. Even if there's not one tank in the game, generally everyone's going to have more HP than you, which usually out benefits the 8% that you gain only when the enemy is low HP. So think about this for a second. 40% of the enemy's HP means that 60% is already missing. To do the 60% HP of the enemy champion, you're going to have to deal 60% of their HP without Coup de Grace bonus. So, which means in layman's terms, right? You're going to deal less damage until they're low HP. Meanwhile, on this rune, you get the same bonus or higher throughout the entire fight. Not just at some point in the game, but always more percent damage, which is a lot more sustainable and a lot more consistent. And also a higher number in percentages if there's tanks involved, right? Last Stand on ADC is generally not that good because on ADC your role is kind of to stay alive, and if you're low HP on ADC you're doing something wrong. I don't take something like Assassins as an excuse because positioning is part of playing ADC correctly, and if an ADC can, easily one-shot you in a team fight, then your positioning is either wrong or your teammates who are supposed to peel for you aren't doing that. This is like a give and take. Sometimes it's your fault, sometimes it's your teammates' fault. But it's almost never the case that assassins just get to do damage to you on ADC with nothing in return or like no punishment involved. That's generally not the case. Also, in terms of Triumph versus Presence of Mind, you need to think about scaling again. So what a lot of people kind of don't understand If you're going to use Presence of Mind to have an easier laning phase, then you need to think about what happens after laning phase. You may get misdirected into a mindset where the game ends after laning phase, or like if you lose lane, the game is just over. But often, especially on ADC or scaling champions in general, this is not really the case. Most games will end around 2 to 3 items. At this point, the laning phase has already ended, and you're going to be more relying on your items and strategy in teamfights and objectives to win the game, less than your personal skill. So Triumph could be a better rune in this case because it will help you stay alive in teamfights that extend, where you're going to take 1 or 2 kills or 1 or 2 assists and then basically heal back up without having a healer in your team. Again, if you have a healer in your team, maybe don't take this rune, maybe take Overheal, which will help you in laning phase since you have a healer, right? Or lifesteal, depending on your build. And it's going to help you after the laning phase against something like assassins, who will do less damage to you depending on how much lifesteal and healing you get from your teammates. This will keep you alive longer. There's exceptions like anti-shield items or champion abilities, but these are edge cases again. Okay, as for Sorcerer page, I want you to think about this for a second. Right now, the meta in Korea and China on ADC specifically is to take a rune page as secondary that will keep you alive in the laning phase or give you a small advantage in laning phase. Although this sounds good on paper, if you think about the praxis of this happening or being applied, it's usually inspiration or domination. And the rune pages, both rune pages, don't really give you that much of an advantage. Think about the runes that it provides. Most ADCs will take something like Biscuit Delivery and Time Warp Tonic, and then go 3 potions and a longsword. What this means for laning phase is that you will have 2 more AD in early laning phase versus a Doran's Blade. But in return you get less HP, which means you could utilize cut down more often. But in this early game phase, you won't have that much advantage of this rune page. So 2 more 80 for 80 less HP, but you have 3 potions, you have Biscuit to get some more mana back, and you have Time Warp Tonic to increase your healing, as well as give you like 3 small heals instead of the summoner spell, which you can use in fights to maybe surprise your enemy if they do not know about Time Warp Tonic's effect. Here's what I need you to consider. After the laning phase, depending on how much more CS you have or how much more kills you have, you can be ahead without rune pages. But if there's a game that is even, and I'm going to assume that you're playing in an elo that you belong in, hence you're not going to be that much ahead of the enemy ADC unless for some things to happen that weren't supposed to happen, like your support being a smurf or your jungler doing something very out of the ordinary. It is much easier to just rely on runes to build a lead, which will also not fall off after the game or after the laning phase, but it will keep scaling and you will keep building a bigger lead as long as you don't lose your lead through gameplay. So as long as you don't misplay, you will gradually build up a lead just by having the right runes. Inspiration doesn't help here. The only thing I can think of is going Futures Market and Magical Footwear, where you will gain 300 gold in value, a little more because you get a little more movement speed than base boots give you, and you will have 250 gold more or less because of Futures Market, which will give you more gold earlier than everyone else in the game. So that's the only 2 runes I can think of that actually provide a value that will scale towards your champion. Everything else is just kind of quality of life to keep you alive in lane, but I think if you need these to stay alive in lane, maybe work on your ADC, work on your performance before using little niche features that cheat you out of laning phase. I think that's a good idea. I think that will help you understand your champion better and your mana limit and your HP limit and your recalls and everything else. This is just kind of a cheat page for people who don't understand lane or want to cheat their way out of laning phase, which you don't really need if you're good enough. So let's think about other options for ADC. Generally on ADC you will take Precision Primary. This goes for almost all ADCs with a few exceptions. So your temporary secondary pages are Domination, Sorcery, or Inspiration, or Resolve. Now, a lot of people go Domination because for some reason a trend has started where ADCs want more lifesteal. Lifesteal is the way to go. Lifesteal keeps you alive, so you don't have to worry about positioning or anything else. So they go Taste of Blood and Ravenous Hunter. But here's the problem. Taste of Blood is a good rune, I don't disagree. But Ravenous Hunter got nerfed over and over and over again to the point where it's not really useful anymore, especially on ADCs that do AoE damage as their main thing. It also doesn't scale multiplicatively to other lifesteal items or runes that you take. It will be additive damage bonuses or healing bonuses, so it will not scale well with other healing. There's better healing options as well, like Bloodline. Bloodline scales really well with the way you build an ADC, the way you additionally build damage and crit. Ravenous doesn't do this, and Taste of Blood doesn't either. So yeah, this build is kind of not good because you're going to lose a lot of value in return for lifesteal, which only keeps you alive but doesn't increase your damage, which is generally what you want. You want more damage, not more sustainability on a champion that is supposed to be a glass cannon. There's some other ways you can use Domination. For example, Kai'Sa or champions that want or need Hail of Blades. Hail of Blades is the only way that Domination is actually worth in League of Legends for ADC, in my opinion. Hail of Blades gives you a lot of value in short trades on champions that benefit from auto attack stacking like Vayne or Kai'Sa, or that generally just have a short engage with a lot of damage that's like burst centered, and therefore Hail of Blades, if used correctly, can be really good. In those cases where you're building Hail of Blades, Taste of Blood isn't good and a good and valid option. Now I want you to think about these three runes. In most cases, Eyeball Collection is just taken more often because it is reliable. You get a kill, you get an assist, you get more damage. It's really easy, it's really straightforward. You get 10 kills, you max it out, you get some damage bonus. Now, there's two other ones that can be useful. Ghost Portal, for example, will give you more adaptive damage than Eyeball Collection. But here's the catch, you need to be able to ward effectively. If you can ward and place your wards in a way that is effective and throughout the entire game, then you will have at the end more damage than if you had Eyeball Collection with 10 kills. The only downside for this on ADC is that you generally want to take Blue Trinket at the mid to late game stage once you hit level 9, because Blue Trinket provides more value to you than the yellow wards, because you can use Blue Trinket to check for areas of vision, just like Ash Bird Arrow can do, and kind of establish where you're safe, where you're not safe when you're roaming a jungle with your team, or generally when you push lanes or something, you can ward the jungle next to you so you stay safe from assassins and whatnot. So I think Ghost Portal is very useful on ADCs that have some kind of peel or don't rely on blue ward at level 9. For example, Ashe, because she has her own blue ward at level 9 and earlier, which is her Bird Arrow. So Ghost Portal could be an option where you want more damage but less safety with vision, or you have a support who is actively warding. So for Ravenous and these four, there's some debating going on, but I think Ravenous is at a point where it just doesn't do enough to be useful. It's not worth taking anymore. It doesn't provide as much value as you want it to be. So there's some other options. I know that a lot of mythics got actives and a lot of other items got actives now. So for example, Gale Force and also Shield Bow have an active that has a cooldown. So what you could do is go in Genius Hunter, which not only got buffed just now, it gives you 20 item haste instead of 10 now, but that will also mean that you can use Gale Force more often or get the shield from Shield Bow more often, which could make the difference between life and death. So this is a valuable option that you could take on an ADC if you're forced to go this rune page. These other two ones are generally not used because, well, for one, Ultimate Hunter won't really make a difference because you will always have your ult in a fight, generally speaking. And Relentless Hunter is only useful for roaming or when you're like trying to get from one place to another really fast. For example, in a stage of the game where you're going to be farming lanes, farming camps, you know, you want to get from one place to another quite fast, then Relentless can be a good option, but only then. It's not useful in combat, it's not useful for anything other than movement out of combat. So yeah, I think the best runes for the end of Season 11 is going to be something like this or this, depending on your champion and depending on your support. If you're forced to take Hail of Blades. What I would always consider the most viable on ADC for secondary runes is Sorcery, just simply because of the value that Gathering Storm provides. Again, think about it in terms of scaling. ADCs want to be able to get as much damage as they can, and Gathering Storm will generally outperform any other rune in terms of value if you think in terms of gold advantage. At 10 minutes, you gain what is essentially 150 gold value. At 20 minutes, you gain what is essentially 900 gold worth of value. At 900 gold, that's again 3 kills, or what boils down to like 10 waves, maybe less, no, yeah. So like 6 waves, right? So think about it in terms of gold value, gold advantage that you're gaining for basically doing nothing. You can lose the lane, you can win the lane, but Gathering Storm is always going to give you an advantage, and there's basically no counter other than ending the game at 8 minutes, which generally doesn't happen, right? Or getting such a big advantage over you that the rune doesn't matter anymore, but then you're doing something wrong, right? As for other options, depending on the champion you're playing, sometimes Mana Flow Band can be useful. Just keep in mind that it won't really help you on your first bag, before your first bag is over. So it won't help you in the first like 1, 2, 3, 4 levels. It will only help you afterwards, once you recall and go back to lane. So it's useful on a champion like Ezreal, it's useful on a champion like Misfortune, but only after the first recall, in which case you need to sustain your mana more effectively before you recall. But it can be a valid option. Also, I think Jhin benefits a lot from Celerity because of the way he wants to kite in a fight, and because of the way how when he reloads his gun he gains movement speed, and also the combined movement speed that you gain through Fleet Footwork when you use Fleet Footwork, of course. Because of that, Celerity can be a valid option on an ADC like Jhin. Other than that, Absolute Focus is a very good option because you're generally not attacked in team fights, because you're going to be behind your front line, and you can use this value a lot since you're going to stay at full HP for a majority of the fight where you do damage to the enemy, and therefore you get up to a lot of damage. In this case, it grants you 1.8 attack every level. So there's that. And then you have Transcendence, which gives you haste. Now haste got reworked, and since haste got reworked, it's been not that good on ADC, since, you know, you're basically almost always just using your auto attacks. And if that's not the case, then your cooldowns are already low enough, so you don't really benefit from haste that much anymore. Think about like Lucian, Ezreal. Those champions generally have so little cooldowns already that you don't really gain much more from building this much haste. However, think about this for a second. ADCs that benefit from haste are usually taking CDR boots, or, you know, the boots that give you haste. What this means for the game is you don't really get many combat stats from your boots except for movement speed and the CDR, which is like a passive combat stat. In comparison to this, you could be building resistances or attack speed. Now, if you have this rune, you're open to do so, because this rune basically removes the benefit of your boots to be haste based. So with these runes, you don't need the haste anymore. Thus, you can go attack speed or resistances to maybe be tankier in team fights or don't get one shot. Generally speaking, Nimbus Cloak got kind of nerfed to the ground and it's not useful anymore. And there's only a few cases where nullifying orb is actually worth it. Think about Evelyn, Execute, think about something like that, right? But in almost all cases, you just want more damage. It's just better to take more damage and become a glass cannon and fully embrace the role of being a glass cannon as ADC. Now, I noticed that this video is very based around ADC. This is mainly because I play ADC for the most part, and also because I think ADC is the most misunderstood role when it comes to runes and item build. There's a lot of evidence for this if you look at current solo queue in any region or even pro games, where people cannot make up their mind on what items to build or what runes to go. They change it every 3 months. It always seems random or intuitive thinking, and they usually change it back or to another thing once they realize it's not that good. This is due to some YouTubers or some pro players starting a trend to try something out because they don't do math. They just look at experience and then they choose an outcome based on that. And what happens is that people look at these ranked games or look at these results and then also copy and paste those runes and those items in their games, which results in a high win rate and high play rate for these item builds and runes, which then reflects upon sites like op.gg, u.gg, and Mobalytics. And people are going to look at those as well and use general win rates to decide what to take in their games, which is generally not that good of an idea because, like I just described, this process is usually biased towards high popularity and not high effectiveness. So with that in mind, I hope this video somewhat helped you understand runes. If you want me to make a more generalized rune guide or like a generalized rune review for most or other roles or like every other role in the game, then do write so in the comments. I think I've covered almost all the things that I've put down in this little notepad. If you disagree or found that I forgot to talk about something, or if you otherwise think I'm wrong about any of this, feel free to comment. Feel free to hit me up on Discord so we can talk about it. I am convinced that if we talk through, I can explain all my positions and make you understand why it's probably right. Again, I'm not an expert. I'm silver in solo queue. I don't really play ranked that much, but I think if you have a general understanding of video game buffs and nerfs, or debuffs in this case, then you can apply this to League of Legends, which has a very simple rune system, and items are not that complicated either. You just have to look at it. And this is basically all I wanted to say. Go look up runes and items and damage calculations on lol.fandom. There's a lot of information available that you can use to do your own research, do your own calculations. You don't need to look at random YouTubers telling you what to do. Just stay informed, And make sure you don't fall into traps like some YouTuber or Twitch streamer telling you what's right without giving you an actual reason and expecting you to just accept it or trust them blindly, because that's usually not a good idea and will usually lead you to get stuck doing what other people are doing blindly, just not helping at all. So yeah, this is all I wanted to say. I hope you enjoyed. I'm kind of used to this format now where I just do one take, and maybe I cut out some parts that are wrong, maybe I don't. It's some low effort content, but in the end it's about the information, not the editing. Editing I do on my other channel, you can find it in the about page. If you want edited stuff right there, there's your videos. But yeah, this channel is more based about sharing information, uncut, raw, like on my streams that people seem to be enjoying in terms of looking back on them and viewing them. You can look at my stream on twitch.tv/Nadeoki. Goodbye.